Hi, Father Nathan and the crew of the Joyful Friar Podcast. I'm coming to you live from the wilds of Australia to wish you a happy anniversary, happy birthday of your podcast, your very first birthday. I'm very happy to see how your ministry is growing and also how your message is being received all over the world. You're doing great work. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Father Nathan, on a beautiful one-year anniversary of your successful podcast.
The Joyful Friar. Both Evan and I really enjoy being on your podcast. You bring such a lively conversation to an issue that sometimes isn't so easy to talk about. So thank you so much for all that you bring to this world.
Thank you very much for what you brought to this world and what you'll continue to bring to this world with the Joyful Friar.
And many podcasts to come, we hope. Happy anniversary.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar Podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host, and today I'm really co-hosting with three friends, each of whom I'll have introduce themselves in just a moment. We're more joyful than ever because this is our anniversary show. But we were all a part of dreaming this thing into existence as much as about a year and a half or more ago. And we're coming up now on the anniversary of year one. So I today invited three people. They're not necessarily in order of importance. Lisa, why don't you start first, simply because on my screen, you're the big one, the way that Zoom goes in and out and you're there. So who are you anyway?
Yeah, well, hello, everyone. I'm Lisa, and I'm a prayer partner of Father Nathan's. I think we've known each other for over 25 years, a very long time. And I also do some behind the scenes work with the MailChimp newsletter and fielding and sorting some of the listeners' questions that come to you via email.
Lisa is also a Dominican. She's a lay Dominican. I'm a friar, but there are four branches in our Dominican family, and you and your husband are both a part of that. This is a really small operation. I have my assistant Chantel, who works for me part-time, and Joe, our web guy, and everybody else is absolutely volunteer. And Lisa does a lot of work for me and has for years, keeping an email distribution list. Lisa does that all as a gift to me and to you. So, and we do go back like 25 years. Yeah, I was your campus minister when you were still in school. But
you were our spiritual director for a nonprofit we worked with, and you were our director and our leader, and just really grateful now through the years to continue a friendship. And it is a gift to me to be involved in this. It's truly something I appreciate. I've learned a lot from.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. Sammy, you want to go next?
I'm Sammy Madden. I know Father Nathan through the Newman Center at the University of Arizona, and that's kind of where we met. And then just started our friendship through that. And then Father Nathan had asked for some help when he was doing his classes on scriptures. And so got to work with him on that. And then from that was helping start this podcast.
Sammy is multi-talented and kind of techie. I don't know how techie you think you are, but compared to me, you run circles around me. During the pandemic, and it was impossible to do just much of anything live and in person, I taught several rather long scripture classes. And I think for some of them, we had as many as about 70 people, having people go into small groups and come back. And Sammy knew how to navigate all of that on Zoom. I was new to Zoom, as a lot of people were at the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of us had not paid much attention to that until the kind of isolation that the pandemic forced upon us made us want to figure out how to be with other people. And Sammy was all over that. So he became, I don't know, sidekick or a companion, not just behind the scenes, but it seemed like that you were very beloved of a lot of people that were on those Zoom calls for those scripture courses. They're archived on the YouTube channel. If any of you would like to know more about the Christian Gospels, Sammy was instrumental in making that happen for me. Glad to have you here today, Sammy. And that brings us to Lori.
It's delightful to be with you all again. I'm a newer friend. I was reading Father Nathan's books, and we visited one time, and then I signed up for his newsletter. So thank you, Lisa. And through the newsletter, you were giving your scripture courses, and so I took the scripture course. And I was always grateful when Sammy was there because he kept us all together. And then I think kind of this group that helped with the podcast grew out of the scripture courses. That's what it felt like to me. And I learned so much from the scripture course. So I would encourage anyone to head over to YouTube and check them out. They're really wonderful.
I think I'm famous for not sleeping that well. My night visitors, and even on a night that nobody shows up, I'm usually awake for at least about an hour, somewhere in the middle of the night. And I don't mind. It's just my habit, and I pray for people, and sometimes I'll noodle around on my own media. And I went back to one of those shows and was just watching one of those Bible studies, and it was fun because I was watching some of the participants talk about, they'd gone into a breakout session and they came back and they were sharing their thoughts. And I thought, that's what I want to do for the anniversary show. I just want to get a few part of conceiving of this podcast and just talk together about it. So thank you for being a part of all that. I was looking at some archived email, and we started podcast advisory team is what we called ourselves back in January of 22. So it's now late September of 23. So I was looking at it, and I think we had a baby. It was 9 months from the time we conceived the idea of a podcast to when it launched in October 4th of 2022. And now we're coming up on 1 year from that. So I'm wondering what you remember about when we were first thinking about this idea. What are some of the things that come to mind that trying to even imagine this thing? None of us had done this before.
I would say that for us, because we were wading into uncharted waters, we were just trying to figure out what does this look like and how do we make it so that people have a connection and that they keep wanting to come back, and just what is this for the format and all that? What does this all look like? And how do we make it something for people who want to continue to listen to it, but also get nourished in the ways that they need to be nourished?
One of the hopes was to spread and communicate with people across countries, across cities, across communities. And, you're the order of preacher. And what a beautiful thing to be able to have that as a possible venue to reach people that you wouldn't otherwise speak with in your own circle.
I remember you had the little cartoon character of yourself. I love the artwork. That's it. Yeah. I mean, I just thought it was brilliant. And I remember they were tossing around, what should it look like, how to incorporate it. And then I remember you wanted to tell your stories from your book. And because the story helped me so much, I was very excited that you could expand your audience through a podcast. And then the last thing I remember, I was so happy that Sammy was there because I don't know anything about podcasts. And I thought, okay, well, Sammy's here. He'll take care of that part of it. So I was just really encouraged. But I don't think of it as having a baby. I always think about it as having an egg. And it's like in this little incubation period. It just felt like it was really fragile, but just wonderful.
I agree with that because we were all like, how do we do this?
Yeah. And even how? What should you call it? What is the name?
I was advised to go to a New York City publicity person who helps people launch podcasts. It was a free consult that would have led to a paid contract to start the podcast. And when I mentioned I wanted to call it the Joyful Friar is the nickname of St. Dominic, the founder of our order. It's part of the reason I joined this particular order. There's so many of them in the Catholic Church. But I didn't want to join any of the ones that had pain or suffering in their names, because I just think life gives you enough of that. And you don't really need to go. I was attracted to joy. And I believe the first Christian followers of Jesus who went out after Good Friday and Easter Sunday, they brought their stories and said what they were excited about and their experiences, even if they sounded crazy. In that conversation, they're saying, but you're talking about death. You're going to confuse your audience if you name your show The Joyful Friar and it's about people that died suddenly and violently. We kind of knew that we were going different directions. Then a friend of mine, Donna Rebido, who some of you know, Donna had a podcast, and we met and just had lunch together, and we're like old friends by the end of lunch. She already had a podcast, and she had a little book on how to start a podcast. So she gave it to me, and I started trying to be really diligent about reading it and making notes and everything. And then I just kind of threw it aside. I said, I get it. I'm beginning to understand that this can be done.
Yeah. And have courage to step out.
Because it does take some courage to organize and to speak. And I just amazing how it all flowed together.
I think one of the things we were talking about then also was, when we talk about forming, is, do we only want to be where Father Nathan's, talking about him, not only his experiences with his books, or do we want to have where it's, him and co-host who's asking questions, or, kind of, so we were trying to figure out how do we make this format what, is very fluid, because you want it to be just very simple and it flows. And that's kind of what we were trying to figure out, is how do we make this flow?
What are some of the shows that stuck out to you as ones you're also listeners and viewers of the podcast? What are some that you thought of as ones that were memorable to you?
My favorite was Sister Lucy. I'd love to meet her someday. I think she seemed to have great courage. And what I appreciated just overall, the sheer variety of people and experiences, like a new way to look at a current life circumstance. And even the stories that you read, Father Nathan, out of your books, even though I'd read them before, some of the nuances that you would say struck it forward in a different way or gave light to a current circumstance. And it reminded me of some of your homilies at church, and how God has a way of just speaking directly to each individual heart through them. And I think that these stories, this podcast, afforded that same opportunity.
My favorite was Sister Lucy as well. Her story is so inspiring, and the fact that she had to kind of step out of her own community to help people. Matt Mayer has a song called Bigger Table, and I think of these lyrics a lot. I wrote them down. It's in all things God is able. His love has a bigger table. There is a place for you. And that song just reminds me of Sister Lucy. So anyway, thank you for introducing Sister Lucy to me, because I've gotten a lot out of that.
Would you, Lori, describe Sister Lucy's work for people that aren't familiar with her, didn't see that podcast?
She lives in India, and she was in a religion. I mean, she's still part of it, but she stepped out of that community and decided, after a very difficult night when a woman had come to her asking for help, and she wasn't able to provide it at that moment in time. Well, the woman was seriously burned. And Sister Lucy said that will never happen again. And she went out and she's created these homes for people who are marginalized in India. I think what's really inspiring is then the people she helps, they help other people, right? They are the ones that are building the community. It is just it's a beautiful story. So I think Lisa was the one that suggested Sister Lucy, but I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
It was actually Chantel found her. And so my kudos to Chantel. I mean, but I told her that I'm like, how wonderful. I'm like, this is so great. She's so great. We gotta bring her to Arizona.
She was delightful to talk with, and I had never met her, and she, said yes to the show right away. She was just lovely to speak with. I was thinking of, I have a picture that's on my bedroom wall. This is from many years ago, about 10 years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
That's Raymond Moody, who wrote Life After Life, and created the category of near-death experience in 1975 when I was in college. And Evan Alexander, who's famous for, nearly dying and being in a coma for 9 days and having all these experiences, and he's a neuroscientist. They both were famous, and I went to a conference up in Portland where they were there, and at these conferences, they're usually sponsored by a nonprofit, and one of the things they do is if you pay extra money to go to the cocktail party, the members-only little thing, you get to have a little bit of, up-close time with the famous people. And I did that, and I've got a picture taken with them, and they signed it. And it's been on my wall as kind of a vision board, because I believe, as a follower of Jesus, that my mission is to go out to all the world and tell the good news. And here are these two guys that have succeeded at it. They had their own little experiences, or not so little experiences, but then they found a way to tell them on a large scale. And I stood in between them like, could this rub off? I think I have something important to say. I don't know how to get it out to all the world, but I want to try, and you guys have been helping with that.
I was looking at the numbers, and I was amazed that 2,800 people listened to your podcast with Dr. Raymond Moody.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, think about the little egg that was incubated. I mean, we didn't know how to start, and I just think that's a great testament to the progress of the podcast.
And also think about how amazing it is that it's being listened to internationally. It's not just within the U.S. and it's having an impact there as well. So, that's amazing, and that speaks to so much of that, like that metaphor, Lori, of just that growing of this. Is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's in 30 countries.
Yeah. Well, in the Catholic Church on the calendar, we're not that far from Halloween, the night before All Hallows, All Saints, and All Saints Day includes all of them, whether they're still famous or not. They had to be at least regionally famous, at least for a short time, to be made a saint at all. But there are lots of ones that are not very well known. And then the next day is All Souls Day, and you didn't have to necessarily be canonized that's why they're put so close together. So in fact, my earlier books, we've launched them during All Saints and All Souls, asking the saints and souls to help these books find their way into the hearts of people that would benefit by the message. And my next book, we're hoping to do that too. Anybody can do that. It doesn't have to take technical skill to just ask however you form a prayer.
Right.
Lisa just suggested that a place that we might go in this conversation is what's next. Lisa, what do you think is a direction you think that we might be headed?
Well, I think that your discussions serve a lot of opportunities for diving into things a little deeper that I've heard from your listeners, as far as grief and loss, as far as even discussion about the angels. And I look forward to the FAQ that you're going to be providing, which answers questions more about this ministry, because it is distinctive, and how it flows from our Catholic teaching and church history, yet how it's universal for all, no matter what faith or background we have, because of our humanity. These are topics that connect us all. We have loved ones that have died. We all die. And I think that I just look forward to more opportunities, just as you mentioned with the sower and the seed. I have that vision of the drop in the water, that's iconic picture of just kind of the circles growing and flowing, and to see how each part of that permeates into the different communities that we're involved with.
Demi, what do you think?
Well, I think the next part of this is, of course, keeping this going because it's a very, very important ministry. And so definitely don't want to lose this. It means so much to so many people, and definitely, with your book coming out, when it does, is continuing to pull in those stories, and then allowing people to take the time to think about it. And then, if they, of course, can look at the FAQs and the other resources that are going to be on your website, taking full advantage of those, and then, if they're ready to take the next step, then, figuring out what is that next step and actually being able to deal with it. Because grief and loss is not something that is easy to deal with.
And Laurie, what do you think?
I don't know. What's next. I just know that it'll be good. But I mean, I agree with Lisa and Sammy, but when we first started incubating the egg, I wouldn't have projected where it's at today. So I'm not very good at prognostication in the future, I guess.
Well, neither am I necessarily, but one of the things that has that's touched me a lot is the number of young people dying suddenly, and the number for every time there's the loss of a young person, there are a bunch of people who love them who are now brokenhearted, and I hear from a lot of them. So, and a lot of them don't have the benefit of an organized, systematic teaching about what a human person is, and life and death and afterlife and God and God's presence. And so I think in the coming year, I'm going to be doing more with how to reimagine death and afterlife, even if death comes in a traumatic way and really knocks you off your feet. When I started writing this book, I wasn't writing toward the grief support genre necessarily. I was really thinking of it more as just spiritual experience and relating the experiences. But one of the places where there's been most response to it was from people for whom their life has just changed so dramatically because of a sudden loss. And so I feel like I need to pay more attention to that as we go forward.
I'd love to see people on the podcast who've gone in their community and used that courage, more Sister Lucy's. I mean, Laurie, I see you as a person of courage as well, and Sammy, the both of you. So I just look forward to the everyday person or the Sister Lucy's or what have you who are creating change in dynamic ways, because I think those inspire me and inspire so many and give us faith and hope.
Well, that's been a feedback that we've gotten from listeners and viewers, is that some of them have really appreciated the interviews with major thought leaders and so on. And I was just shocked that you could start a little podcast and within the first 3 or 4 months, you're calling on these really important people and they say yes to being on your show. Part of that is the simplicity of the model. People can, you're asking for about an hour of their time or even less, and they can do that in their pajamas if they want to. All you're asking them to do is go on a call, and they say yes so readily. I just was shocked at that. But then some of the ones that people have enjoyed the most have not been from the rich and famous, if you will. It's just been some little somebody whose story was on the show that they responded to. Well, we're getting near the end of our time. I want to make sure that that each of you have an opportunity to sound off on whatever note you want to leave as we look back on this experience and look forward to year 2 in this podcast, and what you would maybe like to say to our audience.
I would just like to say to the listeners to write in and give their account of any impacts your podcast has had on them. and perhaps what impact they have had on their communities because of some of the glimmers of knowledge or counsel or joy that you've shared. And just to continue to ask listeners to pray for the process, and just can't wait for whatever new beginnings emerge.
Thank you. Lori, how about you?
I would just encourage people to pick up your books. That was my model. I read your books and they impacted me so profoundly. And I know you have the new ones coming out. When you read the books, you know, it's this experience, but then you tend to expound on it in your podcast. And I actually learn, even if it's a story I've already read, I learn this compassionate response that I can bring into the world, or I learn a new spiritual practice. And I think it's through that process that we begin to shift and our life becomes healed. And we can be the little rock with all the little ripples out of it. So I just want to encourage people to listen and read and participate to the amount that they would like. I think it's beneficial.
All right. That book that will be the third in the Afterlife Interrupted series. It's you can see the Toto book on the wall, the product placement on the wall behind me. That was the first book. And Toto to the Wizard of Oz is a spiritual adventure. And then books 1 and 2 in the Afterlife Interrupted series. The third one, the subtitle of it will be Please Let Me Explain. And we're taking 13 stories that have moved through this process of coming in a dream, being with prayer partners, making a passage, and then getting their permission to use their story. But some of them just explain things in such detail that it can help people go, wow, I would have never thought that. You know, could the afterlife possibly be that way? Sometimes people think of whatever the afterlife is, it must be sort of one size fits all. Everybody must go through this same process, and oftentimes people's ideas of even heaven are boring. How do we let that happen? These people have such wonderful stories to tell, and so then the next book, Please Let Me Explain, is the kind of construct behind how we chose these 13 stories. Sammy, how about you?
Yeah, I think what I would say is I'm just glad that we took the shot in the dark on this podcast, and because it clearly has been, as I said, important ministry that's being done. And I think what I would say to the listeners is, take the time to really listen through maybe the previous episodes and allow yourself to take in that information, and any of the new episodes that are going to come out is to listen to those as well, and definitely, talk about what this means to you. Definitely send in your responses. How has this, podcast affected you? And, and maybe also just, at times give us hints as to, what can we do to help make this different, or, give us some ideas, but, just continue to be the community that enjoys listening to this, and, and giving that and sharing what you think about this, because, it's very important to this podcast to keep it going.
Well, we're beyond 30,000 download, and a lot of that's because somebody recommended it. So, and it's not that hard to say to somebody, hey, there's this podcast that's half an hour. I think you might benefit by this. So any of you that are in our audience, that if you think there's somebody that would benefit from one of the podcasts that you've heard, that's the simplest way, is that word of mouth. Well, I'm grateful to all of our listeners over the course of the past year, some of whom I've gotten to know and some of whom I haven't. And I'm grateful to lots of people that have helped put this together. I haven't even mentioned my sister, Catherine. She's over in the other, we're not even in the same day. She's over in Australia right now. But shout out to Catherine. She's been so instrumental in so much of the work that I've done. And Chantel, our assistant, she had never produced a podcast either. She just learned how to do it off YouTube, I think, but she just pieced it together. So I wish for all of you to have a little bit of Chantel in you, or to find the Chantel near you. For what you don't know how to do, somebody else does. And sometimes when you ask for help, it shows up. That's certainly been the case for me. So for now, that's this episode of the Joyful Friar Podcast, our first anniversary episode. We are grateful that you joined us and wish you blessings on whatever it is that you believe you'd like to do in your marvelous life. God bless you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button. See you next time. God bless.
No, you're good.
How in the world would we ever launch a podcast? We can't even.
I know.
How about it together? Happy first podcast anniversary to the Joyful Friar.